Okay, let's get started. Today we're talking about masking in Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw. So the first thing, well, let's move ahead. I'll go ahead with the presentation, and we're going to have a little poll in a few minutes, but we'll wait for that. Okay, so first a little bit about me. A number of you have been to my workshops before, so you know me, and but I will repeat myself here. I basically started off when I was pretty young. I apprenticed with a professional photographer in Boston. I started my photography probably when I was about 10 years old. I've done photography instruction since college, since 1969. I teach Photoshop. I've done workshops in the Everglades National Park, Joshua Tree National Park, and in Monument Valley Tribal Park. We publish photo bird cheat sheets for Nikon and Canon cameras at photocheatsheets.com, and we sell those through Adorama and B&H. So the workshops that I do a focus stacking workshop. That's probably going to be the next workshop I do after this. I only do about one workshop a month. I teach Adobe Lightroom Classic and Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw. I do an infrared photography workshop. I do a basic digital photography workshop. And I do a workshop on Photoshop layers, mainly for Lightroom users. This is my contact information. If you downloaded this presentation, you have all these slides. I gave you the link this morning. So the first thing we're going to do is going to have a little poll. And I just want to ask, these are the 3 questions, and it's anonymous, so nothing's being recorded, who you are, what you're answering. So you should have the poll now. I'll leave it up there for about 2 minutes. And you can answer the questions, and we'll kind of know what everybody's experience is.
Video to work.
Made noise, that's why he showed up. He'll be back as soon as he says something.
Okay, I assume we're done.
I muted it.
I know it.
Okay.
Okay, so interesting. Most of you use Lightroom. I'm going to end the poll now. And I'll share the results. The odd thing is, I don't get to see this afterwards. This is the only time Zoom shows this to me. So after the workshop ends, I won't see any of this information. But basically, most of you use Lightroom. 4 people use Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw. So we have mostly Lightroom users. About half of you, exactly half of you that answered, have used masking, and half haven't. If you use Lightroom, do you also use Photoshop? Well, 17 people, 61% have used Photoshop, 36% have not. And one person doesn't use Lightroom at all. So kind of interesting. So let's move on. Okay. So we're going to start off talking about some old school stuff. Anybody in the group ever used an enlarger, photographic paper?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
well, we got a number of you that did.
Yes.
So you're probably familiar with the old school version of dodging and burning. Dodging is when you take an enlarger and you're projecting an image onto a sheet of photographic paper, and you use a little wand, usually with a little circle like you see there, and you do local adjustments to the image that's going to get projected on the paper. You're basically blocking the light from the enlarger from hitting the paper. This is called dodging. And this is something very common when you're using an enlarger. We use the same term today in Photoshop. We have burning, which is just the opposite, where we're blocking everything but a small area, and we let the light flow through to the photographic paper in a local area. These are local adjustments. These were adjustments that we made locally in the image because maybe part of the image was too dark and we wanted to lighten it, or maybe it was too light and we wanted to darken it. These are local adjustments. It's kind of akin to what we're going to do in masking. In Photoshop, we have two tools called the Dodge tool and the Burn tool. And you notice that the Dodge tool has a little wand just like the one on the left. But the Burn tool actually has a hand, making a little circle, because that's generally how we used to do burning. We used to use our hand, not a piece of cardboard with a hole in it, because it was just a lot easier. We'd make a real small hole and we'd only let the light pass through to certain parts of the paper. So that's where these terms came from, just a little history. So the term mask, I don't like the term mask. The term mask describes the visual part of what we're doing, but it does not describe, oh, I'm sorry, I am probably blocking this. I'm going to make myself a little smaller here. I'll put myself way down here. Okay. So basically, masking describes the visual part of what we're doing, but it doesn't describe what we're actually doing. What we're actually doing is selecting. So what we do is we actually select part of an image, and then we make some kind of an adjustment to that selection. So mask, not the greatest word. I'm not crazy about it. Okay. There we go. Okay. So here's a mask. So what we do is we select part of the image, and in all the cases in this workshop, we're going to show selections or masks as this magenta color. You can end up choosing what color and what opacity for the mask you want in Lightroom or Photoshop. I happen to like using magenta because it's a color that's less common in most images. So it's real easy to see the mask. But if you had an image with a lot of magenta, you may want to change the mask color. But for this workshop, all the masks will be magenta. They'll kind of look like this. So in this image, we've masked the background, everything but the tree. And with the intent that we're going to make some kind of adjustment to whatever is masked. So we're making local adjustments, and this is the key. If you use Lightroom, and most of you use Lightroom, when you're using Lightroom, all the adjustments you're making, or most of the adjustments if you're not using masking, are global. So if you change the exposure, you change the contrast, you change whatever, what you're doing is you're changing it to the entire image. But the entire image may not need that change. Maybe only part of the image needs the change. Global adjustments are much less useful than local adjustments. As a matter of fact, you can basically do local adjustments to the entire image. And you may have to do 2, 3, 4 different local adjustments. And we'll see how these work. But in the case of this image, what needs to be adjusted?
Face is too dark.
What's that?
His face is too dark.
The face is too dark. Anything else?
Foreground.
Yeah, the foreground area. This area here is too dark. Right in here, it's too dark. This area is too dark. The hood of the car is a little too bright. The face is too dark. There's lots of stuff that needs to be adjusted here, but they need to be adjusted differently. For instance, we don't want to adjust the hood of the car the same way we adjust the face. Because if we would do a global adjustment and lighten the face, then the white car in the background would be blown out white. It would just be really brilliant, and it's not what you want. So local adjustments allow you to really edit the image the way it needs to be edited. So in this image, it took several adjustments, several local adjustments to come up with the adjusted image at the bottom right. Now, my philosophy is to do minor global adjustments initially, then everything else is done with local adjustments or masking. And you're going to see some, how you can do some amazing edits using this. So the topics today, we're going to talk about what is Adobe Camera Raw. If you're a Lightroom user, you may never have heard Adobe Camera Raw, or maybe you've heard the term and not sure what it was. I used to hear from people telling me that Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw are completely different and they work differently, and not true. They're identical, exact. So everything in Adobe Camera Raw is in Lightroom, but we'll go into that. We'll talk about what is masking. We'll talk about what changed in masking, especially in Lightroom. We'll talk about the kinds of masks there are. There's a number of different kinds of masks. We'll talk about displaying masks, the different ways you can display them. We'll talk about modifying masks. And this is some of the real power in masking, is when you modify masks. Flow, density, and feathering in auto mask. These are terms and features that are really, really important to masking. And there are some other options we'll talk about, and we'll give you some examples. And we'll have questions. All along the way, we're going to be going back and forth in and out of the PowerPoint slides, going to Lightroom and or Adobe Camera Raw. And we'll be making adjustments in both. And I will tell you this, that masking, and this is important because people always end up asking the question later, masking is identical in Lightroom and in Adobe Camera Raw. There's absolutely no difference, okay? Except the font is a little smaller in Lightroom. Why? I don't know. I don't like using Lightroom. I don't like the Lightroom interface because everything is a little bit smaller than it is in Photoshop or Adobe Camera Raw. I like to use Adobe Camera Raw, but we'll do adjustments in both. Okay, so the first question is, what is Adobe Camera Raw? Adobe Camera Raw is the engine that powers all Adobe image editing products. So in Lightroom, you have a develop module. When you're in the develop module, you are using Adobe Camera Raw. That's what it is. It's built into Lightroom, but it's a separate dialog in Photoshop. So does anybody here use Bridge? I'm going to guess not. No, a little bit. Bridge is probably not used that much anymore, but it's a separate dialog. Adobe Camera Raw is a separate dialog in Photoshop. And it's also, it used to be a separate dialog in Photoshop Elements. I haven't used Elements in years, so I'm not sure exactly what it's like in there now. I think it's still a separate dialog. So it's built into Lightroom, and it's a separate dialog in Photoshop and Bridge. The interface for Lightroom is slightly different than for Photoshop, but everything in Lightroom is an ACR, but Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop has a couple of additional capabilities that Lightroom doesn't have, nothing major. Because a RAW file is an image, RAW files are data. RAW files are not images. This is a real popular misconception. It's just data, and that data has to be converted to an image. And the way you do that is with Adobe Camera Raw. The main purpose of Adobe Camera Raw is to convert RAW files into images. It's not that you can't edit JPEGs with Adobe Camera Raw. You can, just the way you edit JPEGs in Lightroom. But its main goal in life originally, its only goal in life originally, was to convert data into an image, raw data into an image.
Bert, I have a workflow question for you.
Sure.
So, I use Lightroom for most editing, and then go to Photoshop if there's something a little more complicated. Now, when I'm importing into Lightroom, which also serves obviously my catalog, I was told a while back, I forget in what webinar, to do it in DNG instead of keeping them as raw files because of future compatibility and the like. So the issue is that if you open, so theoretically, if you're saying there's benefits to ACR in Photoshop, you can open it in ACR from Lightroom, but if you're importing them in as DNGs, when you open it, it opens it in Photoshop native, not in the ACR module.
Well, you can. That's a preference you can set. You can actually go into preferences in Photoshop, and there's an Adobe Camera Raw section, and you can tell it you want to edit JPEGs and or TIFFs and or DNGs. Actually, DNGs open natively, I thought, in Adobe Camera Raw. Maybe not. There is a preference for it. Actually, let's take a look at Photoshop. We'll go into preferences. Okay, and let's see. This is, where's Adobe Camera Raw? It's down here somewhere. Why am I not seeing this?
Hey, Bert, the image on the screen is all blurry for us, or for me.
Yeah, it was a second ago.
It may, if you have a slow connection, it may take time for it to clear up. Does anybody else see it blurry?
Very
soft.
very black.
Very soft, and I've got files already.
Really?
Yeah, it's like it doesn't have enough pixels.
Okay, hold on. Oh, yeah. You know what? Let me do this. Okay, you're gonna lose my image for a second here. I will change the way I'm doing this. Okay. Now I have to give you. Okay. You can see me now, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so let's try it this way.
Oh,
You see-
better.
Yes.
Much.
Okay. Okay.
Much better.
Okay. So I'm not seeing Adobe Camera Raw. I don't understand why I'm not seeing that. Let's see. Maybe I need to open a file. I don't know. No, I don't think so. Edit should be in edit preferences, and it should. Oh, Camera Raw. There it is. Taking a little while. Steve, could you mute Yeah, there you go. Okay, so under file handling, you can choose whether to do JPEG or TIFF. Yeah, DNG is supported natively. So if you have a DNG, it should open automatically in Adobe Camera Raw. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that well, I don't know. Never tried it. But you can choose to do JPEGs and TIFFs in Adobe Camera Raw. Okay, let's continue. I'm not sure why it's not opening. It should be opening in Adobe Camera Raw. Okay. So Adobe Camera Raw, now I told you it started off doing, its only purpose in life was to convert data to an image. But now as time has gone on, Adobe keeps adding more editing to it. So here's the confusing difference between Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw. Basically, this is what you see in Lightroom on the left side. This is what you see in Photoshop or in ACR. Everything is identical except for these sections right down here. And these are minor, and you actually can do some of these in Lightroom in a different way. But everything else is identical. So the basic is basic. But in a few places, they use different names like tone curve or curve. Well, that's a minor change. But if we look at hue color in Lightroom, HSL and color in Lightroom, it's called color mixer in Adobe Camera Raw, but it's identical. It's the exact same feature. Every option's identical. Detail is detail. Color grading is color grading, just in a different place. Lens corrections is one of the changes. It's called optics in ACR. Why Adobe does this, who knows? Transform and geometry, exact same feature, just a different name. So for the most part, you know, Adobe's just trying to confuse us, and they do a good job of it. And you can see the basic section. We have all of these icons. We have all those. And all of these are in Lightroom as well. And they're at the top. Just different places. Why the interfaces are different, I don't know, but it's basically identical. So your editing capabilities in Lightroom is identical to your editing capabilities in Adobe Camera Raw. Okay. So XMP files. We need to explain a couple of different files that Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw create. XMP files are called sidecar files. And every change you make in Lightroom or every change you make in Adobe Camera Raw is stored in this XMP file. And this allows us to do non-destructive editing. So if you were to open up an image and edit it, make a whole bunch of changes, then close it, and then reopen it again, all of those edits would be reapplied to that image, because what Adobe does is it looks inside this XMP file and says, oh, you changed the exposure 10%. You changed the contrast 5%. You did this, you did that, and it just applies all those settings. But the original file is never touched. It's never changed. So you can you could change any of those settings, and when you save it, the new settings will get saved in the XMP file. So the XMP sidecar files basically store all the changes you make to your images. It allows for non-destructive. It allows you to edit an image without actually changing that image. So it's created when you save or open your image after editing in ACR, but it's made, it actually is adjusted, saved to a file after every single change you make in Lightroom. And a lot of people have complained about this because it does slow Lightroom down, because, or could slow Lightroom down, shouldn't, but in some computers, some instances it does, because it's basically every time you adjust a slider, it's writing to the file. But in ACR, Nothing gets written until you tell it you want it to be written. Then it all gets written at once. So it creates non-destructive editing. The original file isn't changed or adjusted. Each time you reopen an image, the changes stored in the XMP are reestablished. The changes can be undone or changed without affecting the original file. The original file never changes. So if you open up a raw file, the original raw file is never changed. Okay, what is masking? Well, masking is a way to select a specific area within an image so that you can make isolated adjustments to that area. Masks define where your adjustments will take place. They are local. So we're doing local adjustments. We select an area of an image, we make the adjustments, and only where we've selected does it get changed. ACR provides a series of mask tools that allow you a lot of flexibility, an amazing amount of flexibility. Masks generally have a color, so you can see what you've masked. So in the image on the left, this is before masking, we have a butterfly, and it's a little bit dark. And what I did is I applied a mask to it. And you can see the magenta mask applied to that butterfly. And you can see the background isn't affected. It's not masked. And when I increase the exposure a little bit, maybe the saturation, I brightened up the butterfly. And the background is unaffected. So this is what we mean by local adjustments. We're making changes locally, just to little areas that we want to change. In the area we could make adjustments to, sometimes I will adjust just one eye of a person or an animal. I just want to adjust the eye, which is a tiny, tiny little area. I may want to brighten it up a little bit. You can do that with masking. So what can you do to a masked area? Well, there's a wide variety of adjustments. They're broken up into 4 categories. The first one being light. In the light section, you can see we can change the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. In the color section, we have a few other color-oriented adjustments. And then we have effects and we have detail. So we have 4 sections, and in each of these sections, we can make changes, whatever changes we want to an image or to a local area of an image, a masked area. We have something called feathering, and feathering is incredibly important when it comes to masking. Feathering helps soften a mask edge. So if we look at this image on the screen, we see the magenta color is fading as it comes down. And we see it's actually up in this area, it's pretty much full intensity. But starting right about at this line, it starts getting gradually less magenta. So what this means is that this mask is feathered. In this area here is the feathered area. It's a gradual change from 100%, it's 100% up here, and it's 0% here. So whatever adjustment we make will be 100% in this area, but there'll be no adjustment in this area. And in the area in between, this feathered area, it's going to be gradual from 100% to 0. That's what feathering is. So here's an example. In this first image, the top left, I have no vignette. I'm going to create a vignette, but this is the original image. Here, I created a vignette with no feathering. So you can see the edge is really, really sharp. This isn't something you'd probably want to do unless you wanted to create a spotlight effect, where it looks like there's a spotlight on this flower, on this thistle. But typically we don't want to do that. So in this bottom left image, I created a 10% feather. And you can see now the edge is much softer than the no feathering edge. However, when we go to 50% feathering, now you can't even tell that there was an adjustment made. It's very gradual. You can't see a spotlight, although, you know, if you compare these two images, you know, there's obviously a difference. There's a vignette. I darken the edges. And we do this with feathering, creating a
So
mask.
Bert,
Yep.
yeah, I understand why you'd want to feather it in this situation, since the no feathering, for example, is kind of jarring and probably not what you're going for. However, what if you were trying to edit just the flower in the center? Then would you want it to be harder edges, or would you still want to use feathering?
You'd probably want to use a harder edge, and we're going to get to that. So let's hold off on answering that for the moment, because when we
Thank
get
you.
to the brush tool, we're going to see how we do that. There's actually a couple ways we can do it, and we'll see. But yeah, you're right. You'd probably want to use a less of a feather. In this case, I just want to demonstrate what feathering is. So we have first, you know, we need to understand what feathering is before we can go into how we use it and when we use it. Okay, so what's new? Well, when I say new, I'm talking prior to October 26th, 2021, because that's when Adobe completely changed their masking. Prior to October 26th, 2021, you had masking in Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw, but it was different. It wasn't anywhere near as good as it is today. So what changed? And this is in Lightroom. In Lightroom, this is the old way we saw it. There were basically three controls, three icons, and these three icons did everything in masking. The new way in Lightroom, basically we just have one icon, and this is for all the masking, and it opens up a dialog that looks like this. And what's in red here, the brush, linear gradient, and radial gradient, these were previously in Lightroom and in Adobe Camera Raw, but now we have more. You can see the others that we have as well. So they kind of changed the way the interface looks. It's a single icon now, this guy right here. And when you click on it, you get this window opens up with all your choices. So this is the old versus new interface. What's new is that we have luminance. You know, we in the old version we had luminance, color, and depth ranges, but they were connected to the brush, radial, and linear gradient tools. We could not use them independently. In the new version, we now can use them independently. Now, there's one other file that Adobe created when they came up with this new masking version. And these are called ACR sidecar files. We've already learned about XMP sidecar files. Now we're going to learn about ACR sidecar files. You may or may not see these. If you use Lightroom, you probably never saw the XMP file, because what Adobe did is they hid them. They were there, but you couldn't see them. In Photoshop, they did not hide them, and you could see them, and you could remove them, you could delete them. You could actually go in there and edit them if you wanted to. I don't know too many people that did that. But ACR sidecar files actually do show up in Lightroom. And a lot of people were complaining about that. They didn't want to see the XMPs, and they don't want to see the ACRs. Why they can't come up with ACRs, I don't know. Because basically the explanation is because they couldn't fit all the data in the XMP file, so they had to create a second file in ACR. Now, XMP files weren't that big. I don't know why that's the case, but I have no idea what they're doing internally, so I can't address that. So basically, the ACR files were created to store additional data. So you may or may not see it. Sometimes I create masks and I don't see them. Sometimes I do. I don't know what the rationale is for them. So let's get right into it. What kind of masks are there? Well, ACR, and when we're talking about ACR, we're talking about Lightroom. or Photoshop, ACR provides two kinds of artificial intelligence masks. These are truly amazing. Nothing short of astounding, actually. The first one is called Select Subject. And the icon for Select Subject is this little guy right here. And you can kind of see it right in here. I don't know if you can see that. It's a really tiny one, but that's the icon for Select Subject. And in this case of this cattle egret, I did a Select Subject, and you can see what Adobe did to select the subject. It's astounding how accurate it is.
So
Incredibly
question,
accurate.
Bert, why didn't it select the tree?
I don't know. Would you have selected the tree?
No, but when I try to use this, it tells me it can't find the selection. I can't make it find the selection I'm looking for.
Well, in some cases it will do that if whatever algorithm they're using to determine what to mask, sometimes they can't find it. I don't see that too many times though.
Okay.
But I'll show you some examples that are just astounding that
Sure.
it does know. And in this case, it knew exactly what to select. And you can see it's very, very accurate. Now, the second one is called Select Sky. And in this image, I did a Select Sky, and you can see the sky selected. And it's astounding at how accurate it is. It did not do the tree. It did not do even these little areas, right here. I made that too big. This little thing right here, which is really blurry, it knew that wasn't the sky, and it didn't mask it. It's astounding in how accurate it actually selected the sky. So again, we're selecting areas of the image to make local adjustments to. So if we wanted to darken the sky or change the color temperature of the sky, we could do that. If we wanted to just adjust the cattle egret, the subject, we could do it. So these are artificial intelligence. Literally, it's one click of a button and the selection gets made. Or as somebody just mentioned, sometimes it can't find the subject. Doesn't happen. I haven't had that happen too often. I have had it happen, but not too often. It usually finds the subject pretty well. And if the sky in the image, I've never had it not find the sky.
Bert?
Yep.
This is Bob. Can you place those icons? In other words, could you could you place where you want the subject icon to be?
No,
Okay.
no, you can't. I mean, are you saying the icon, or can you tell it what part of the image to select?
Well, if you place the icon, you would tell it what you think the subject is.
Okay, so you want to tell it what you think the subject is.
Yeah.
There is not a capability to do that in ACR. Photoshop does have that capability.
Okay.
There's a selection tool in Photoshop that lets you select with either a marquee selection, a rectangular one, or you can actually go down there with I forget the term. You can actually very finely select what you want the subject to be. But that doesn't exist yet. I'm going to guess that Adobe is going to make refinements in this as we go along. You're going to see there are some shortcomings in it. However, for the most part, it's pretty darn good right now. Okay, there are 6 additional mask types that you can use to create masks. The first one is the brush, and we use the brush. The brush is the most flexible of all, and we use it to make any kind of local adjustments we want. We get to select the area, so it's not artificial intelligence. There's a linear gradient, which if you've ever used a graduated neutral density filter for landscape photography, this is very similar. You have a radial gradient. That's what I used to create that little vignette I showed you on the flower a couple of slides ago. There's a color range. You can pick, you want to mask certain colors in an image. You can do certain luminance ranges, certain bright or dark areas or midtones You get to choose. And you can do something called a depth range, which is only for HEIC files, which are the only place these files exist are on some Apple iPhones. And basically, Apple created this because an earlier version of the iPhone, because it had such limited storage that the images had to be much higher compressed than JPEG allowed. So they created this HEIC file. But for the most part, the HEIC files are not good for editing because there's not a lot of data in them. So we'll talk about the brush. We're going to talk about each one of these in turn, and we'll go to do some examples of them. The brush can be used to manually create a mask using your mouse as a brush. You can resize the brush. You can feather the adjustment. So you basically have size, feathering, flow, and density. And we also have something called auto mask. Each of these defines how the brush works. So the more feathering we have, the softer the edge. And this is what the brush looks like. And the area in between the dotted area and the solid area is the feathering area. So if the feathering was 0, you wouldn't even see this dotted line. If it was 100, it would be further away from the solid line. And that's the area where the feathering occurs. Size, of course, is the size of the brush. The density and flow. We're going to talk about these in detail. The flow is, imagine you have a paintbrush and you're dipping it in watercolors. And you take your brush and you stroke across the paper. A little bit of that color is going to be deposited on the paper. But now you do another layer. Now a little more paint has been deposited. And then you do another, maybe you do 4 or 5 strokes, and now you have more intense color. 1 stroke gave you a little color, 5 strokes give you more intense color. That's what happens with flow. So when using the brush, we can use a low flow to layer the mask. And we're going to see how that works. We'll talk more in detail about it. Density is the maximum effect adjustments can have in the mask. Auto mask uses intelligent edge detection. So we can use it to detect edges in only brush within a certain area. Again, we're going to see how all these work. So here's an example of brush strokes. Brush strokes at various feather and flow. So in this case, we have the flow, and I show you a flow at 5%, 25, 50, 75, and 100%. And these have a 25% feather. Over here, we have 100% feather. So you can see at 5%, one brush stroke, you can barely see. I don't know why that keeps giving me this. It's actually giving me an extra line when I draw. You can barely see it. Now, if I were to stroke more than once with a 5% flow, this area would get darker. With a 25% flow, you can see it's darker, 50, 75, 100. With feathering, you can see how the edge is soft. The edge softens from 25% to 100%. We can see a real softening of the edges of that brush stroke. So this is feathering and flow. Flow is like, again, you're dipping your brush in paint and you're going to do multiple strokes to layer the amount of paint you want. The amount of paint is the amount of mask. So with a brush, we have the most flexible of the mask tools. So here's an area. I have this little area of this branch I wanted to lighten. It's a very small local area. So I took my brush and I painted that area of the branch. And then I increase the shadows a little bit. And we can see that we went from this dark area to not so dark. Very, very simple adjustment. We didn't adjust much in the image at all, but we can see the effect of it. Okay. So,
Art,
yeah.
before you go any further, I just want to get clear in my own mind, again, the difference between density and flow. So as you apply, let's say, you keep layering on more and more of flow, okay, it's getting slightly darker and darker. Okay. How does that differ than what density is? I'm still not 100% sure what the distinction between the two of those are.
Okay. And you're not going to be, not yet.
Okay.
What we're going to do is I'm going to show you an example of using a brush, and I'm waiting to see which image I want to use here. Okay, we use this image. So now we're in Photoshop, and this is Adobe Camera Raw. And if you use Lightroom, you'll recognize most everything here. Again, like I showed you earlier, some of the names change. Let's see, let's go into Lightroom. Let's do this before I do that. Okay. And let's go into Lightroom. And let me see if I have this image in here. I should. No, I don't. Well, okay, doesn't matter where we're in. We're in Lightroom, and here's the develop module, and you can see exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, okay, so forth. Adobe Camera Raw, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, all the same. Everything's the same. So in here, we choose this the masking tool right here. And when I do, I'm going to choose the brush. Okay. So now we're going to do some example stuff. It's not going to be meaningful, but it'll show you, it'll demonstrate what we're doing here. So I'm going to increase the size. Now there's two ways to increase the size. You can use the slider, which works really well, or you can use the keys. There are a million keystrokes in Lightroom and Photoshop. The bracket keys, the square bracket keys, can be used to make your brush smaller or larger. So I'll just make it about this size. So now you see my flow and density. I'm going to set the feather to 0. My flow and density is set to 100. So I'm just going to draw a line across here. Hold on, I want to redo that. Well, I won't redo it, but you can see how dark it is. Now, if I move flow to 50%, roughly, you can see it's lighter. If I move it down to about 10%, you can see it's even lighter. So if we make an adjustment, like a crazy adjustment, I'm going to increase the exposure to +4, you can see the effect. 100% flow gave me 100, all that exposure adjustment. But 50% only gave me half of it, and 10% only gave me 10% of it.
So can you get to the same place by kind of keeping the flow constant and altering the exposure change? Are those equivalent?
Yeah, I mean, there is an equivalency there. For instance, let's leave it at 12%, and I'm going to draw a line across here, and I'm going to go again. You see how it's layering? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So at some point, I get to 100% because I'm adding 12% each time I do it. Does that make sense? Now, if I wanted to increase the exposure, I wanted the 100% one to look right. Well, maybe I'm going to drop this down and maybe I say that's the way I want the grass to look. Now these below it, they don't have as much effect. So it's a combination of how much adjustment you make and how much flow there is on the mask. Now, let's undo. I'm going to undo all that. And this little guy right here basically resets all the masks. There we go. So now, let's say I wanted to use the brush. And the first thing I want to do is, see this area in here is really dark. I want to lighten that area up. So what I'm going to do is I'll increase my feather a little bit. And I'm going to mask just this area here. Let's get the flow all the way up. Okay, and I'll do this side of it. And I'm going to do it really quickly and dirty. Just, I don't want to take time on this. Okay, so here we go. So now we've masked that whole area. And I'm going to increase my exposure to make it brighter. Okay. Now I want to get the front of this barn brighter. But if I do the full mask, it's going to be too bright. I don't want to do that. I'm going to undo it. So instead, I'm going to reduce my flow. And now I can do this like that. So if we look at our mask, there's an option here to show overlay. And if I click that, it shows my overlay. And you can see how lighter the mask is here than it is here, because I used a lower flow. So it's the same adjustment. It's just two different effects. So there's a relationship between the flow and the adjustment. Does that kind of answer your question? I'm not sure who asked the questions. I couldn't see, but
Okay, so that makes sense. I mean, I can understand what you're doing there with flow. Okay, now what about density?
okay. Let's reset everything. And we're going to go through these later, a little bit further on, but we'll cover them now since we're talking about it. So let's do a brush, and I'm going to hit density. I'll put it at 50%. Well, actually, let's leave it at 100%. And I'll put flow at 50. And okay, so there's my mask. Now I'm going to put density at 50. Density at 50 and flow at 50 is the same as density at 100 and flow at 25. Does that make sense? If I were to double my density and half my flow, I'd have the same. It's like going from f 5.6 at a hundredth of a second to f8 at a 50th of a second, if you want an analogy. There's a direct relationship between that. The density says this is the maximum amount I can get. I can never get to 100%. If I put flow at 100% and density at 50%, that's what I get. If I put density at 100%, that's what I get.
Okay, so density is really just the upper limit cap.
It's the upper limit cap, exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So let's. Okay, let's cancel out of this. I'm going to open up a different image. Let me find an image. Yeah, well, okay, let's use this one. So now I'm going to show you select subject, and here's an image. And if I come in here and I choose, I'll hit auto just because I almost always do that. And generally, I don't do much else to these images except for local adjustments. So now I come in here and I choose my masking and I hit select subject. It takes a few seconds to think about it, and then it selects the subject. If I were to do that manually, that would be an arduous task. I used to do this manually. It was painful. This is absolutely incredible. So now I can adjust just the subject any way I want, and the background is not affected. If I want to bring up the shadows, the lamb, there we go. Maybe the black's a little blacker, the white's a little whiter. So basically we went from that to that. And if I show the overlay, we can see exactly what it did. And it knew exactly what the subject was. How it knows this, I don't know. Pretty amazing. Let me give you another one. Here's an image. And since there's no one subject in this, we'll try select subject, but I don't know what it'll do. But if I do select sky, it will do a darn good job at selecting the sky. It knows what the sky is. So now I can go in here and I can, change the contrast of the sky, increase the whites, the temperature, maybe I'll change a little bit. And I can darken it a little bit. So I have complete control just over the sky. Now, if I were to come in here and create a new mask and choose select subject, it may fail. I don't know what it would select. Sometimes it surprises you. Look at that. I mean, if I were to say what the subject was in here, that would be it. And it actually selected it, which is pretty astounding to me. I'm kind of dumbfounded. In any event, select sky and select subject are really, really easy to use. They're single buttons, nothing else to do. So, again, if we wanted to, increase the exposure of this area, give it a little more contrast, bring up the shadows a little bit. There we go. So we basically went from that to that.
So, Bert, can you select subject and then invert?
Yeah, we'll talk about invert in a minute. But yes, you can use invert. Invert's really useful. When we talk about modifying masks, there's 4 things we can do to masks to modify them, and invert is one of them. Okay.
Bert, I have a question, Bert.
Yep.
The last photo you had, the boy was pretty well lit up, and the animal was really dark. But the subject, when you hit the subject, you concluded both. Is there a way you can somehow adjust the photo so that you might see more texture on the fur of the animal?
Yes, and we'll talk about
just the animal,
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get into modifying masks.
Okay.
Which is going to be soon. Okay. Let's see. Let's go back to our presentation. So that was the brush. Excuse me, I take a drink of water. I must say, after every one of these workshops, I feel like I have COVID because I have a sore throat. So I got to try and drink more water while I'm doing it. I have a sore throat every time I talk. Okay, what kind of mask I do? The next one we'll talk about is the linear gradient. This is one of my favorite masks. I love the linear gradient. It's used to manually create a mask that's applied gradually, just like the name implies, like a graduated neutral density filter. So the feathering is determined by how far you stretch the gradient. So in this image, which is basically a black image, I have a mask, and you can see that from here to here, this area is 100%, full adjustment. But from this red dot down to this white dot, we are going from 100% to 0%. So at the top and above, from the red dot and beyond, we have full adjustment, 100%. So you can kind of think of this as flow, and the flow is decreasing as we move towards the white dot. Okay. So this is extremely useful for many different cases. So here's an example of an image, and I wanted to darken the sky. So what I did is I took my my linear gradient, and everything from the red dot on up here is 100% adjustment. And from here down to here, gradual from 100% to 0. And you can see I basically just darken the sky a little bit, and there's the result. And you can't tell that it was done. It was gradual. There's no distinct line showing where an adjustment was made. It's gradual. So this feathering, the feathering is basically this entire area between the red dot and the white dot. And you can stretch it as far as you want. Okay, so let's go into Lightroom.
I have a quick question on that, the gradient. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, so there seems to be two schools of thought with linear gradients and with neutral density gradients. One school seems to like using the physical neutral density gradient at the time of capture, and the other school says don't do it at the time of capture, do it in post because you have a lot more control that way. And of course, the edge may not be a straight line at the moment of capture. Do you have a preference?
Well, without question, you want to do as much in camera as you can. Your in camera adjustments are always going to be your best. However, you can't always do it. And I will, I'm just looking for some pictures here I want to add. Okay, I'm sorry I'm looking for a folder here and I don't see it. Masking files. Should be in here. There it is. Okay. I just want to import all of these. Who's going to help me? How do I import all these images? Well, these are all imported, aren't they? It says they're already imported. Okay, I don't quite understand why I'm not.
The ones that are grayed out are already imported.
Yeah, so
you had a couple there that were not.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm not seeing them in here then. Oh, here they are. Okay. Okay, so getting back to the question, always better to do it in camera, but I will say this. I have a whole bunch of graduated neutral density filters, and I haven't used them in years. I have become incredibly spoiled. Raw images have become better and better. Sensors have become better and better. And we have a lot of dynamic range in our images now that we never used to have. When I shot film, I always used graduated neutral density filters. But today, with the incredible quality we have with raw images, I've gotten lazy because I get just as good a results without doing it. So I've gotten lazy. The answer is you're always better to do it in camera. But if you have a fairly modern camera, you're going to find that, and you're shooting raw, you're going to find you're going to have an incredible amount of dynamic range to deal with. Okay, so let's look at a graduated neutral density filter, and I am going to choose, I don't know, we'll go back to this image. Okay, so we're going to do a graduated neutral density filter here. I'll go to the develop module. File cannot be found. Why is this doing this to me? Okay, let's go to a different image. Okay, we'll use this image.
Yeah, you've got a bunch of exclamation points. The catalog doesn't seem to be pointing to the right directory.
Okay. So it's not finding this one either?
Yeah, yeah. In your film strips, you'll see a lot of exclamation points.
Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, well, let's go to one. Okay, let's go to this image. Oh, no, that's exclamation too. Holy man, they all have it.
Do you have a separate external drive for those pictures?
No, it's all local.
Okay.
I don't know.
No.
Let's see. There's got to be something. Okay, here, let's do this one. There we go. Okay, so in here, we're going to choose the masking, which is this guy right here. And we're going to move this out just so we can see it. Oh, I already have 4 masks in here. Let's get rid of them all. Why do I have 4 masks in here? Yeah, this isn't going to work well. I want to do something from scratch. Okay, I'm not sure why Lightroom is being so uncooperative here, but let's do something here. We'll take this image again. And what we're going to do is a linear gradient on it. So we're going to want to darken the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the masking tool. I'm going to choose linear gradient. And now you notice my cursor is a little plus sign. So if I click and drag from here, or actually I just clicked. I can do this. I don't want to do it that big, and I want it to be the other way around. Okay, good time to point out the X key. The X key will invert your mask. In the case of a linear gradient, it will just swap it. So if I keep pressing X, you see what it does. And this is kind of how I want to do the linear gradient. So between the red dot and the white dot, I have from 0 to 100% effect.
Oh, no.
And here we can make some adjustments, and you can see that if I darken the sky, it's a gradual adjustment. I can drag in the middle and move the whole thing up any way I want. I can lighten the sky or darken it, do whatever I want to do to it. I can change the color temperature, and you can see it's gradual. Not sure I want to do that, but you get the idea. It's a gradual adjustment. Let's do another one. So I'll create a new mask. I'll do another linear gradient. This time I'm going to do it at the bottom of the image. And you'll notice that you can do it at any angle. A lot of times you want to do it perpendicular. If you hold the shift key down, you'll be constrained to 15-degree increments. So it's easy to keep it straight. So maybe I just wanted to get the foreground a little darker. I can darken the foreground. Very simple. A nice radial adjustment. Now, one of the things you'll notice in this image is the left side of the image is brighter than the right side. I can create another linear gradient, and I can kind of do something like that. And I can darken it a little bit. Equalize it. Okay, so I used 3 different linear gradients here, and I didn't even do what I normally do, which is go here and do auto. Maybe it's a little bit too bright. Do that. And there we go. Now, without the, let's go back to the masking panel. If I want, I can click this eyeball. See this eyeball right here next to create new mask? And it will basically turn off all the masks. So this is the image without the masks, with the masks. Without, with. I'll do it again, without, with. You can do that with any one of these masks. So if this one, I can press the eyeball, without the mask, with the mask. Without, with. It's a subtle adjustment. Foreground and sky. So you can A/B any one of the masks or all the masks at the same time. And if you hover over any of the masks, you get to see the mask, which is really helpful. You can also rename the masks. We're going to talk about that later, but I can double click on mask 1 and I can call it sky. And of course, if I hover over it, I'd know that. You can use show overlay. And if you select any of these masks, it shows you the overlay. Turn it off, it doesn't show it to you. Or you can just hover to see it. So, okay. So that's a linear gradient. It's extremely useful in many cases. I'm going to show you some more cases where it becomes very, very useful. Whoops. Okay, the radial gradient. So the radial gradient is a circular or oval mask where adjustments can be applied inside the mask or outside the mask. Feathering is adjustable, and you can invert it to get to the inside or outside. So in this case right here, the first image here, we have what I call a vignette. I basically drew a radial gradient around this horse, and you can see the feathering from the edge inward. It's gradual, and I'm not going to adjust the horse, although I will adjust a little bit of his feet because he's inside the feathering. However, I'm going to adjust mainly whatever's outside the horse. In this case, I'm basically doing inside the gradient, and you can see the feathering on the edge, and I'm going to make an adjustment mainly on the horse's head here. Two different ways to use a radial gradient. So let's take a look at this next slide. Here's an image, and we have a problem because this blue umbrella is creating a color temperature issue on the face. It's also darkening the face. So I basically created two radial masks. The first one for the entire face, and I adjusted the color temperature. The second one for the hair, because the hair is kind of dark, I wanted to lighten the hair up a little bit, and I lightened it up. And there's the result on the right. So two radial filters to create a slightly better image. And they're really simple. One of the things that we've always had a problem with in photography is multiple light sources. So if you're shooting something, in this case, we have two light sources. We have the sun, and we have the sun filtering through a blue umbrella. Okay, two different colors of light. And what local adjustments allow us to do is change the color temperature in specific areas of an image, which can be extremely useful. I probably should have changed the color temperature, on more of the image. But I just wanted to show a simple example. We'll see some more examples of changing color temperature. So let's go into the radial gradient. Let's see if we can do this in Lightroom. I don't know why I can't see any of these images. Any way to fix this easily?
Yeah,
Click on
click
the
on the
exclamation.
exclamation point and point it at the directory where the file is found.
Ah, okay. Right here. Is that right? Did I do the right one? I think I did the right one. Oh, they all fixed. Most of them got fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you find the most root file, it will trickle down from there if they're all part of the same tree.
Okay, so let's look at this one. I like this one for a radial filter. So I'm going to click on radial on my masking icon. And I already was there. And I'm going to choose, no, I'm not there. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, I already have two masks. Okay, I'm going to delete these. I don't want these masks. Delete. Delete. Okay. So we're going to create a new mask, and I'm going to do a radial gradient. Now, what I don't like about this image is the tree trunk is too bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a gradient, or a radial gradient. And the intent is to cover the chipmunk. Now, you can see the feathering. I'm going to reduce the feathering a little bit. There's a slider here for doing that. And now I'm going to rotate it. So if I put my cursor outside of the radial, I can rotate it. If I put it inside, I can move it. So I'm going to move it, and then I'm going to rotate it. Okay. So that's pretty much, and if I want to, I can expand it a little bit there. And if I press the letter X, I will invert it. Oh, I set it as rejected. That doesn't work in Lightroom. Okay. So we're going to have to use the invert button. And that's right up here. On the top right, you see where it says invert? Turn on invert. I click invert, and you can see it got inverted. Now, one of the things, I'm going to change my coloration. I'm going to show you how to do this later. And I'm going to change the opacity real dark so I can see it easily. Okay, so you can see the area I'm changing. And if we move this in, we can even do it like that. And now let's go and change the exposure. And you can see how we're creating a vignette. So basically, we went from, let's hide this guy, to this. And if I wanted to, I could still maneuver this. I could still turn this around, any way I want, make it bigger, make it smaller. Lots of options. So the radial gradient is really useful for things like this. If I want to, I can create another radial gradient, and maybe I just want to lighten his face up. I'm going to show you a better way of doing this, but this is just sort of an example of using this for this case. And maybe I can just lighten it up. And obviously, I don't want to do it that much, but maybe I just want to brighten the shadows. So let's bring up the shadows a little bit. Ah, there we go. Okay, now there's my gradient, but you wouldn't know looking at this image that I used a radial gradient on it. Actually, I used two radial gradients on it because the feathering is at 45. Feathering was pretty high on both, and you can't see the edge. If I put the feathering down to 0, and you can see clearly where that radial gradient is. But obviously we don't want to do that. We want to move it up here to the extent that it looks natural. Radial gradients are great for adjusting various parts of your image really easily. It's not specific to like if I want to do just a chipmunk, which I'm not doing now because I actually adjusted some of the background. I'm going to show you how to do that as well, but can't do it here. Okay, so that's the radial gradient. The color range is the next one. And the color range is used to mask one or more colors or a range of colors. And you can adjust how strong you want the color range to be. In other words, how much feathering, if you will, in the colors. Which over here you see this refine. The color range has a refine. By the way, I didn't put that hat on there. It just happens automatically. I don't know what it is. I'm using a Wacom pen, and I noticed Wacom pen in Photoshop does this occasionally. It's really weird, especially with masks, but it's doing it here too. But we can refine it. So by moving this slider, we can choose, if we select a green color, we may get some yellow colors. And we may not want the yellow color. So we can slide it to the left and we'll get more precise green, whatever we chose. If we move it to the right, we get a broader range of colors. So in this case, I did a selection of a range of greens, and it basically selected everything except the horse. Now you notice it did select something right in there and a little bit down here because the refine wasn't really specific enough. I could have refined it even more just to get the greens, but then I may not have gotten the whole background. But by darkening the background, I'm able to, and by reducing the exposure, I'm able to darken the background just because the whole background was green. Here's a couple of other examples with color range. Here's our image, and I created a marquee selection of a range of colors. So what it's going to do is going to select every color inside this range where I selected. And I'm able to, I get this really good mask. I darken the background and I'm done. Pretty simple. So let's look at luminance range. I'm sorry, color range. Now, color range, we'll come back in here in this image. If I want to select just the background, this is going to be a hard one to do it with because there's grays, everywhere. I can do the browns, I guess. So let's do a new mask and we'll do a color range. And now I can select one area of this chipmunk. I'll select the brown area. And you can see all the areas that were selected in that color range. I just did a single click and you can see the icon right there, the color range icon, and it selected all of those colors. Now, if I move refine, if I move it to the left, I'm going to get less colors selected. It's going to have to be pretty close to what I selected. If I move it to the right, it's going to be less, and you'll notice that the tree starts getting selected. There's some areas here and here that got selected on the tree, but maybe that's okay. And I'll actually go a little bit further to the right, and we can see more selected. Okay. Now you can add, I'm going to put the refine back in the middle again. Now you can select more colors. So I have one color selected. If I hold the shift key down, I can select another color. So I'm going to come in here and okay, darker brown up here. But you see what it did? It got some of the background now. So I have two different colors selected, and I'm going to move my refine down. And I'm still going to get some of these. And this is some of the problem you get with color masks. This is probably not the best image to do it with. Here's a good image to do it with. Let's do this image. Let's do a color range. And in this case, I'm going to click on the red in the leaf. And you can see it was selected. All the reds were selected. If I, eventually I can get some of the background because there's some actually red in the background. But there we go. So if I want to increase the exposure on the leaf, decrease the exposure, do whatever I want to do to it, I can just do that color range. Let's do the background. I'll do a new color range for the background, and I'll click on part of the green leaf. Now, it's hard to tell. I'm going to change my color from red to blue. There we go. You can see the leaf isn't selected, but all the greens are. And if I move the slider down, I can select just the greens where I clicked. If I want to, I can hold Shift key down and select a different green. So I may select down here, which more of the green selected. And maybe I want to click in here. I do 3 of them. You can do up to 5. So we'll do a 4th one here and a 5th one here. And I even have the stem selected now. And if I try to do a 6th one, I'm going to get an error.
And just to be clear, you're not going, I noticed you're just clicking on the shift. You're not going back and clicking on the add. You don't need to do that.
No, we haven't got to that yet. All I'm doing is selecting multiple color ranges or multiple colors. So I've selected 5 different colors of green, 5 different shades of green in this. And basically I have all the leaves selected now. Now, if I wanted to, let's undo that mask. Let's delete the mask. And let's create a new color range. And this time I'm going to take my cursor and I'm going to click and drag. So now I'm selecting a range of colors. And everything within that, let's do it again. Color range. Everything within that square, that white square, every color in that square is being selected now. So it's kind of like clicking a whole bunch of times and getting a whole bunch of colors selected. Because within here, there's a whole bunch of different shades of green and yellow. And we have that. And if I want more, now I can hold Shift down and I can actually select more. So maybe I want this branch selected too. There we go. Now I get the branches selected. So those were 2 selections. One was a marquee selection where I clicked and dragged, got a range of colors, and one was a single color. So if we want to darken this, we can reduce the exposure, maybe reduce the highlights. Maybe that's a lot, but you get the idea. We can be selective by color. So that's the color range mask. Very handy if you have an image like this where the colors are very specific. We have basically 2 colors in here. Okay. The next mask is a luminance. And the luminance, how many of you do channel masking? Anybody do channel masking? Or luminance masking?
Yeah, I do, but I usually use Photoshop.
Yeah, you can do that in Photoshop. Well, this kind of doesn't take the place of it, but it kind of does. So this is sort of like we want to mask a certain luminance range, a certain brightness range. So we can select all the brightest parts of the image, all the darkest parts, or any range in the middle that we want. And basically we do it with this guy right here. Looks like a big, long, extended battery. This is a slider at each end. So we have a slider here and a slider here, and we can drag each one inward. We have the darks on the left rather, and the brightest parts on the right. So in this case, we also have feathering. So the area in here and the area in here is feathered. So in addition, what we end up with is this square in the middle, and we get these two lines on either end, and we can move any of them. And this is the amount of feathering for the luminance values. So let's look at some examples. So in this image, we have a sky that's a little bit too bright. We have the shirts that are a little bit too bright. And there's some real bright parts of the image, and we want to darken them. Basically, I created a luminance range, and all I did is create the brightest areas in the image, and I was able to darken them very easily. Okay, so let's look at an example of doing that. We're going to Photoshop to do this. And let's see, we will get a image. Let's do this image. Okay, so here's a waterfall. We have some areas in the background that are too bright in the background center, and the water itself is maybe a little bit too bright. And you see that we've already made adjustments here. I'll just hit auto just so you see. So this is the image without any adjustments. I'm going to hit auto, fix it a little bit, but we're going to go in here and do our masks. So we're going to do a luminance range. And in the luminance range, we get this little guy here. And if I drag this button here, we can see now we have the brightest parts in the image selected. This is our feathering, and I can move that inward. But if we did that, it would be obvious that we made the adjustment. We need it to be feathered. So we can do that. So now you notice that the lightest parts of the image are selected. And what you may or may not notice is that the flow is different in different parts of the image. So the brightest parts have the highest flow. The darker selected areas have a lower flow. So they'll get less adjustment. So let's adjust this down. I'm going to adjust the highlights down. And I'll adjust the exposure down a little bit. And you see this gets pretty ugly if we go too far. We just want to do a little bit there. Maybe increase the whites, decrease the blacks. Maybe we can reduce the exposure a little more. There. So now we can come back here if we want, and we can adjust this even more. You can see how changing the feathering really adjusts what kind of a look we get out of this. And we can actually move this down to select more or less. We have a lot of options. So what we have here is we basically went from that to that. There was also an optics adjustment on the basic. Let's get rid of the optics adjustment here. So we went from that to that with basically a luminance range adjustment. Any questions? If we want to, yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a question. So, if you had taken, so you're still, even with your adjustments, you're still blowing out in your detail on the top of the middle of your picture. And so because that's blowing out, you're never going to fix that just with the luminance range.
Well,
I guess that's why I kind of like graduated ND filters, because then you can not overexpose some of your sky.
Well, no, and you're right.
Some of the highlights.
If I had shot this with a grad neutral density filter, it would have been better. As a matter of fact, I may have. I shot this. This is a scene in Vermont, and I've been there twice. The second time I did shoot with graduated neutral density filters, so I'm not sure if I actually shot. I think I did. I'm pretty sure I shot this with a graduated neutral density filter, but I can't say that for sure. But a grad filter would be better. But there are other ways that I'm going to show you to do this that might even work better once we get to modifying them, which we're going to do very shortly.
Bert, wouldn't this be easier with just, I mean, this could be the wrong way to do it, but with a global adjustment, just reducing the highlights?
We already have that. See them?
Okay.
And I get them all the way down now.
Okay, so you're even on top of that. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we still get a lot, if we get rid of all our basic adjustments here, let me turn off the basic adjustments. This is where we are. No basic adjustments and just the masking. But if I hit auto, you see the highlights went way down.
So, okay,
I can
so
do
that's to your point, you're doing that first, and then you're saying you need the luminance mask to just go in and reduce the exposure in that area on top of it.
Right.
Correct.
Yep. Now, if we wanted to, we could come in here and we could do another luminance range. And this time we'll do the darkest areas. And maybe we want to brighten up some of these dark areas a little bit. Of course, we're going to lose contrast when we do that. But the idea is maybe we want to increase the shadow just a little bit. Maybe just a little bit here. But yeah, we're starting to lose it. So we're going to add more blacks and more whites. Oh, there. I'm not sure I like it, but you get the idea. We could do the darks, and we can do midtones. If we want to, we can do midtones this way. I don't often do that. Matter of fact, I don't know if I've ever done midtones. Midtones are usually good. It's usually the shadows and highlights that need adjusting. Okay, so that's luminance. As we're
Also,
going
I
to
want
find,
to point out, could I just point out that had you used a neutral grad in the field, those pine needles and trunks would have been really dark by the time you got the bright yellow leaves knocked down.
yeah, you're right. This image isn't the best image for a grad neutral density. I lost the image. It isn't the best image for a grad neutral density filter because we have darks and lights at the top of the image. So yeah, this wouldn't have been the best image for a grad neutral density filter. Okay. Displaying masks. Adobe gives you multiple ways of seeing your masks. This is the default way, and this is the way I've been showing you. It's the way I like best, and it's what I use. This is called color overlay, and the color, opacity, and intensity of that magenta color can be changed. You can make it any color you want. You saw me change one from red to blue. You can change the opacity so you can see through it more or less. We'll see how to do that in a little bit. The second way you can do it is a color overlay on black and white, which basically gives you a black and white background. I've never used this, but some people may like this. This one is just seeing the image on black and white. So what gets masked stays in color, but what isn't masked goes black and white. Kind of hard if you have a lot of blacks in your image. Like I wouldn't know if that lamb was selected. The lamb's head was selected now. This one is the image on black. So the masked area is visible, but nothing else is visible. It's all black. Or you can have it on white. The image on white, the masked area on white. Or you can have white on black. So Adobe gives you all these different ways of viewing your mask. It's up to you. You get to choose whichever way you like best. I happen to like the default. It works well for me. Okay, modifying masks. This is where the real power comes in. And, when I first saw the new masking, I wasn't sure I liked it. I said, boy, it doesn't look like that. Yep.
A quick question for you.
Yeah.
When you were just talking about displaying masks, so for example, white on black, can you export those masks to Photoshop?
No,
Okay.
no, that's one of the drawbacks. It would be really nice if you could, but you can do a lot of this in Photoshop.
Right.
But you know, Adobe's kind of all over the place. It would be nice if they allowed you to export these masks to Photoshop, but they don't. Okay. When I started saying, when I first saw these new masking, I said, not much changed. But it wasn't until I got into this modifying where I saw a lot changed. And this is really, really powerful stuff. So the first thing you can do is you can add or subtract from a mask. Pretty basic, pretty easy. We'll see how that works in a second. You can basically use any mask type to add or subtract. So you can subtract a linear gradient from a brush. You can add a linear gradient to a brush. You can subtract a radial filter from a linear gradient. If this is boggling your mind, when you see it working, you'll see how easy it is. But any mask can be added or subtracted from any other mask. So in this example, this is a boy with a lamb. It's a different picture than we've seen. In this example, a person has their hand at the bottom left. And when I chose select subject, it actually selected that hand. So I didn't want the hand selected. So what did I do? I used a brush to remove the hand. So I basically hit subtract. And it asked me, well, okay, well, what do you want to subtract? And I chose brush. And you notice the brush has a little minus sign here. That indicates that this brush is subtracting from the subject. And then I basically just brushed out, and you can see the brush icon right here. And it's where I brushed out the hand. And I was able to modify the mask to get it exactly the way I wanted it. So somebody asked before, well, what if I didn't want the lamb? I could have subtracted the lamb with a brush. Okay. There's more to it. Here's an example, and this one was really pretty interesting. Here's an example of creating a linear gradient and then subtracting the subject. Okay, so what's the subject in this image? I kind of tell you here, don't I? It's the road sign in post. Now, would Adobe know how to select the subject? Well, the answer is yes, it did. It selected it perfectly. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here, well, first of all, I added a linear gradient because I wanted to darken the sky. So I add a linear gradient. I want to darken the very top of the sky as if I had used a graduated neutral density filter. But graduated neutral density filters don't have artificial intelligence built into them. This does. I created this, but as you see, I'm going to darken the sign. I don't want to do that. I only want to darken the sky. So I did this linear gradient. And if I had, and I didn't, but if I had done a select subject on this image, this is what I would have gotten. Because when I did this, for this example, this is what got selected as my subject. I have no idea how it knew the sign was in the post was the subject, but it knew. Okay. So, but I didn't do that. So we have the starting image, which is this on the left. I added a linear gradient, and then I subtracted the subject. And you can see that now only the sky is selected. I have a linear gradient. You know, you can't do that with a graduated neutral density filter. Many times I've tried, it doesn't work. So this is really, really powerful when you can do things like this. This is the resulting image. And you see that we have the icon right here for the select subject where I subtracted it. And you see the minus sign right there. We're subtracting the subject from the linear gradient. Okay, so let's do an example of doing that. We'll do this in Lightroom. If I can get Lightroom to cooperate. Okay. That's a good image. Let's do this image here. Okay. I have a mask there, so I want to get rid of the mask. So we're going to delete that mask. Okay. So I have no masks now. So now I need to darken the sky. The sky is really, really too bright. So let's do a linear gradient. And I will drag it. I changed my color to blue here. And I'll show you how to do that here. Right next to show overlay, we see this little patch of blue. If we click on that color, we get this, and I get to choose whatever color I want my overlay to look. And not only that, but you get to change the opacity. Whoop. So you can have an opacity. Somewhere down here, I find it hard to see it. So I like kind of like a really strong opacity. I want to be able to see it. Okay, so there's my linear gradient, and you see it involves the building, and I don't want to darken the building. It's already dark enough. I'm going to have to lighten that building. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract, and I'm going to hit subtract. I will do select subject, and actually I don't even know if it's going to select the right subject. I assume it is. Find out. And presto, look at that. Now, it did not select all of this roof over here. You see that? A little red in there. So I'm going to subtract, in this case, a brush. And I am going to basically do that. So now I have a minus brush. That's where I subtracted from my subject. And now we can darken the sky. I can reduce the highlights, reduce the exposure, give a little clarity, and some whites and some blacks. I love whites and blacks. And now we have a real foreboding sky.
You could have done the same thing by just choosing sky, correct?
Yeah, I could have. You know, I'm trying to show you more here.
I'm just making sure I have the concept down.
Yeah. Let's do another example. Let's get rid of these. Okay, so now we have no mask. Okay, let's do it with the grass. Maybe I want to darken the grass. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to make it pretty big. I'll make it bigger than that. I'll use the bracket keys. I want a little bit of feathering in there. Although I don't think the feathering is going to matter, actually. And I'm going to do all the grass. Well, let's redo this. I need to redo this because I want to show you something else. Okay. We have this thing called auto mask. And I talked about it briefly. We're going to talk about it a little more. But when I select a brush, I have a little checkbox. Whoops. What did I just do? Okay. I have a little checkbox here called auto mask. I can change the size, the feathering, the flow, the density, and I have auto mask. Auto mask, when you have it checked, it uses intelligent edge detection. So I'm not going to use that here. Well, I'll show you using it, not using it. So I have it checked off here. If I click in here, the first place I put my cursor is green, and it's going to try and select only green stuff. And it did a pretty good job. If I undo that, I undid too many things. If I use the brush again, but I turn auto mask off, when I do this, you notice there's nothing intelligent. It's just selecting everything my brush covers. Now, that's handy sometimes because sometimes auto mask is bad. Because what happens is if we turn auto mask on and we select, we just want green here, you'll notice there's some spots in the grass area that have not been selected. Because they didn't, Photoshop thought, hey, these are edges. There's a sharp contrast there. So sometimes I want to turn it off just to make sure I select everything. And in this case, I don't care what I select. I'm going to select all of that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract subject. So let's go in here. Why don't I see? There we go. Subtract. Select subject. And it's thinking for a while. And there we go. And again, we have a little bit of area here that we need to adjust. So I'm going to subtract a brush. And in this case, I'm going to turn auto mask on because I want to use edge detection. I'm going to make my cursor a little smaller. And there we go. So now we can do whatever we want just to the grass. I don't know what I'm trying to do to the grass, but I'm just going to show you selecting. Now, if we wanted to add something, for instance, let's look at our mask. And maybe I say, you know, I want the trees in the background. I forgot to do those. So I'm going to add a brush. I'll leave auto mask on so I won't get the sky. And I don't know what I just did here. I think I did. Let me turn on overlay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I got it. I don't know why the mask isn't showing up. It should be showing up here. But you can see I did select it. I actually got some of the building, which is a good example for me to show you this. Let me turn on the overlay. So now I selected this and I got some of the building by accident. I want to get rid of the building. Well, I could go to subtract and subtract it, but there's an easier way because I just did this with a brush. If I hold down the Alt or Option key, Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac, you notice I get a minus cursor. There's a little minus sign in the middle of that. And I can come in here. Actually, I want to do this. Oh, auto mask is on. I don't know why it's doing that, but I can be a little bit more careful. And if I let go of the Alt or Option key, I can kind of do this again. And a little bit better selection. I turn it off, and all my adjustments are made to all those areas now. So adding and subtracting is very useful for modifying a mask. Sometimes a mask doesn't come out exactly the way you want. If we come in here, yep.
If I could ask a question, you've got a lot of layers now to your mask. I just wanted to be clear. You can go back and adjust any of those brushes or subjects that are modifying mask number one?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you could actually make adds and subtracts to brush two if you wanted, or invert one or the other.
Now brush 2 subtracts, okay? And it's that area. And if I want to adjust it, I'll turn on the overlay so I can see what I'm doing. And let's go to brush 2. Oh, no, I can't do. This is the area. And if I want to, I can subtract more. And I don't know why Lightroom is not showing me this. It should be showing me this right now, and it's not. Let me go into Photoshop or Adobe Camera Raw, and we can do the exact same image here. Find the image though. Okay. Yeah. So what we did, the way we did this is I went in here and I did a brush. I did a fairly large brush, and I did basically all the green. And then I did a subtract, select subject. And there we go. Actually seemed to do a better job here than it did in Lightroom. Didn't select the building as much of the building. So now if I want to add to it, I can add a brush, and I'll turn auto mask on, and I'll make my brush a little smaller. And maybe I just want these trees up here. And I'll hold down Alt or Option, and I'll just subtract anything that I got that I didn't want. There we go. And now we can do whatever we want to do with that, all of that stuff. I'm sorry, I forgot the question. Oh, modifying, yeah. So if we come back in brush 2, I'll bet Adobe made a change recently, because this was not the way it was. You used to be able to see it. Now I can't see it.
When you go to make the adjustment, it turns the mask off so you can see the effect.
Right, but it used to keep it on when you went to adjust the mask. So now it's not doing it. There's been several updates recently. So, we can kind of get rid of some of it there. But you get the idea of being able to add and subtract. Now,
Right.
if we wanted to, this area with the trees, maybe we want to do that at a lower flow. I don't want to lighten them as much or darken them as much, whatever I'm going to do. This is an add. Oh, I already have it in there. So I'd have to subtract. So if I put my flow down and hold my Alt key down, well, now I'm going to delete it. Let's do that. And now I'm going to put my flow low, and I'm going to add to it. And you can see I'm adding with less strength than the bottom part is.
So under that brush too, could you do other operations like an invert or an intersect?
Well, we're going to cover intersect next. But what we can do here with brush 2 is we can add to it, do some other area, and you can do it at different flows. Real light, whatever you want. You can, constantly change the flow and or density and adjust it. So let's go on to intersection. The next topic is confusing at first, but it's really, really simple when you know it. And you're going to know it when we get through. So what we're going to do is intersect 2 masks. And when we intersect 2 masks, what we do is we create 2 masks, but only the areas that are masked by both masks are the result of the mask. So basically, it's easiest if I show you. So here's an example. In this image, I wanted to mask the foreground rocks, only the rocks, nothing else. So what I did is I took a brush and I really, not carefully at all, brushed the whole area that covered all those rocks. Okay. It's a very rough mask. The next thing I did was create a luminance range mask, which only covered the brightest areas in the image, which you can see all the areas, the brightest areas of the image included those bright rocks in the front, but it also included rocks in the background. And I only want the front rocks. So what I did is I intersected those two masks. And what I got is only the areas that are covered by, in magenta, by both masks. And what is that area? It's only the front rocks. So I ended up, the result of the intersection was the image at the bottom. A mask that includes the intersection of the above two masks, and only what's common to both masks is masked. Okay, it's called an intersection. Now, okay, go back here. Photoshop and Lightroom use a different keystroke to do this, which is really weird. I wish Adobe would coordinate the two. I don't know why they have to keep them different, but they do. So let's take a look at, we'll do that. Oh, good. We have that image right here. Okay. And let's see if we have that image in Lightroom, which should be right there. There it is. Okay. So we have this image. We'll do it in Lightroom first. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to make I'll make it a little bit bigger. And I have a, full flow and density. I'm going to shut off auto mask. Whoop. And I'm just going to very roughly cover all these guys. Then I'm going to choose I want to intersect this with a luminosity mask. So what I'm going to do in Lightroom is I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key down to press intersect. When you're doing this in Adobe Camera Raw, you hold Shift down. Why are they different? They are. So in Lightroom here, I use the Alt or Option key and I click on intersect, and then I get this dialog and I say, I want to intersect with a luminance range. And now I have a eyedropper. I can select the luminance range I want, or I can drag these guys the way I want. I'm going to use the dropper. It's easier. Here we go. And look at that. Presto. We have a brush intersecting with a luminance range. And if I want to refine that luminance range, I can do that. And maybe I do. A little more of a feathering. And now I can take the exposure down, maybe take the highlights down. I will give it blacks and whites. And we've reduced the brightness of those rocks. The masking was incredibly simple. And the result we ended up with from this to this. And it took, what, 10 seconds? If I didn't pause and talk about it. Incredibly simple. Let's do another one. Let's do this.
Kurt, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
If you wanted to, in that picture, if you wanted to kind of tone down the sky in the upper middle part, would you do how would you do that one? Would it be like an invert?
Okay, we'll do that in Photoshop here, in ACR. Basically, So you want to do what, the sky?
Yeah, tone it down a little, like darken it up maybe more.
Well, in this
Little bit.
case, I'm going to repeat what I just did. I'm going to do the brush. We'll make the brush, pretty big. And I'm going to turn off auto mask because I want everything to be selected in here. Okay. Now I could select the sky. I could do this.
Yeah.
And my flow isn't 100% actually. Let's get it 100%. Okay. I could do that, and then I could intersect this with a luminance range. And I could click on, let's do the rock here. Yeah, and I still got a little bit of this rock, which I don't want. So I could subtract it, or I could just refine it. If I do a little refining, luminance range.
Did you use a brush there?
I could subtract it. Matter of fact, it looks like I'd have to.
Yeah.
I'd probably want to do that. Or with a brush, I can hold the Alt or Option key down and I can kind of just subtract it there.
Yeah, okay.
And, then we can adjust, the exposure, the highlights. And yeah, we're getting it. Frankly, I'd probably do this with 2 different masks.
Okay.
Just because I may want to do each one. I want to adjust each one a little differently. But actually this didn't come out bad. So we basically went from that to that. And it's pretty, again, it didn't take a lot to do that.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so modifying masks. The next thing we're going to talk about is inverting. And inverting is extremely useful, but it has its limitations. Basically, you can invert a submask. So you can't invert an entire mask. And I'll show you what I mean by that. But we can have an image here without a mask. I did a select sky. And then I inverted the select sky to select everything but the sky. And that lets me change the foreground. Okay, so let's see how that works. We'll go back to this image. And I'm going to do a select sky. So first of all, we'll go and do an auto. And you see the highlights are way down. And we'll come in here and do a select sky. And it's going to think for a few seconds and it's going to select the sky. And we're done. And if we click invert now, it's really weird because when this first came out, you see this little icon right here? In Adobe Camera Raw, that's the invert icon. And there used to be a word next to it, said invert. But in one of the updates, they took it away. So it no longer says it. You have to hover it and see that that's the invert. But in any event, that's invert. So I'm going to click on it. And instantly, I've inverted everything but the sky. If I invert it again, I'll get just the sky. So let's first adjust the sky. I'm going to reduce the highlights. We'll just kind of get it a little more interesting looking. More clarity. There we go. I like that. And I'm going to do a new mask now. And my new mask will be a select sky. If I select subject, I'm only going to get the barn. But I want the grass too. So now I'm going to invert this one. And now I can adjust this. I'm going to bring up the shadows. A little more contrast. Now I want to do just the grass. So the question is, how do I do just the grass? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new mask. I'm going to do a select sky. I'm going to invert it. Then I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to subtract the brush. And I am going to, I'll make the brush a little smaller. I want my feather to be fairly low in this case because I want a fairly hard edge along the edge of the barn. And I have auto mask on. No, I don't. I'll make sure that's on. I want to stay to the edge of the roof line pretty carefully. And we can kind of just do this and this. And this gets a little tricky down here. And I'm not going to do this precisely, but you get the idea. By the way, if you don't use a Wacom pen, I highly recommend you get one. There's actually a couple other manufacturers now that sell them really cheaply, and they're not bad. I've tried one of them. Wacom's a little pricey, but the other ones aren't too bad. So there we go. So now we have most of the grass area, and maybe we want to darken that a little bit. There we go. And reduce highlights. And maybe desaturate it a little bit. It's a little bit bright green. Oh, there we go. And maybe we want to take a new mask and do a linear gradient because you know what? I think this corner of the image is a little bit too bright. Let's look at it. I think it's a little too bright. So I'm going to darken it a little bit. Not that much. There. So we end up going from that to that. 3 masks. And you see each of these areas needed a different kind of adjustment. I wanted to desaturate the grass a little bit, darken it, darken this corner. The sky needed a different adjustment and the building needed an adjustment. And we can do that. Now, the big problem comes when you do something like this and we look at this mask, no, not that mask, this mask. And basically we did all the grass. Well, the problem is I have the sky inverted and I did a brush to subtract the building. If I want to invert the brush, which looks like that, I can do that. Invert. But if I do that, let's show the overlay. If I invert the brush, I get that. I don't get any of the grass, which is originally what I selected. So we're going to invert that again. It's not right. And if I invert the sky, which I've already done, I can't invert that. So the bottom line is you can't invert this mask 3. There's no invert option. You can only invert submasks, which are pretty useless actually. So let me show you how you get around that problem. That does become a big problem. Not sure which image is going to be best for this. Let's look at this one. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be good. If we do a select subject here, it's probably going to do a pretty good job. No, good, perfect. Okay. So I did the select subject. Now my goal here is to select the background. I want the background, the green in the background is too bright. I want to eliminate that. So here's our image. I want to make the green background less bright and maybe change the color temperature a little bit. So when I do a select subject, I get everything but this little part of this guy. So if I add a brush, there we go. Perfect. Now I want to invert it. I can't. Okay. What I can do is I can invert subject. And if I do that, I get that. So, and now I could go in with a brush and I could subtract this, which is really what I'd have to do. But overall, I mean, you may have to make more than one or two adjustments to the select subject. So here's how I go about it. Here's what I got when I did a select subject. Even though I didn't get everything I want, I invert this. Where's invert? Why am I not saying invert? No, I gotta do that. There we go. Okay, so now you can fine tune it. So basically I do a select subject or select sky, whatever you're gonna do, and I invert it and then I adjust it afterwards. So in this case, I'm going to do a subtract and I subtract the brush and I can just kind of go along here and subtract that up. And my background is selected. And at this point, I can do whatever I want to it. So we're going to make it darker, shut off the overlay, and we're going to change the color temperature maybe a little bit, maybe down to there, and maybe even the saturation a little bit. And then maybe I want a little bit of a radial. Do that, and I'm going to invert that. And maybe we'll make this a little darker, give it a little vignette. I kind of like that look. Now, the one thing I did actually when I did do this image is I created a brush, and basically I'm going to enlarge this image and I'm going to go into his eye because I like to see an animal's eye, and we're going to brush in this eye. I'll make a nice small brush and we'll give it some feathering. There we go. And we can kind of like bring up the shadows. Oh, look at that. There's an eyeball in there. And we come back down. And it may not be apparent, but the eyeball is now showing. Just a little. Again, you don't want it to make it too obvious. But so basically what we ended up doing is we went from that to that. And the bright background no longer distracts from our subject. But it's pretty simple. But inverting, you have to be, remember, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone through, did a select subject and fine-tuned it, you know, added brushes, subtracted brushes, did whatever I was going to do, and then realized, oh, I can't invert this. So then I do the select subject and invert it immediately and then adjust it. And then you can get what you want for your background. Okay. So let's revisit flow density, feathering, and auto mask. These are really important concepts. So density sets the maximum amount of change that can be applied. So if you have a density set to 50, the max adjustment you can ever achieve is 50%. So if you increase the exposure by one stop, you're never going to get more than a half a stop adjustment. Flow sets the speed of the adjustment. So a low flow requires more brush strokes to achieve a max adjustment set by the density. So if you set the density to 100, which is the max, in a flow of 50, it'll take 2 brush strokes to achieve 100% adjustment. With a density of 100 and a flow of 10, it'll take 10 brush strokes to achieve 100% adjustment. You can use a reduced flow to allow an adjustment to be layered, allowing more adjustment in some areas and less in others. So think of flow and density of shades of gray. So here we have a cactus, and we can see that the white is 100% density. The black is 0. And we have varying shades in between. And of course, this was a linear gradient. And this is what the gradient actually looked like. Again, looking back at this, we see that our flow, depending on how much flow percent we have varying degrees of paint that we're applying with whatever tool we're using to create a mask. Now, a lot of times I like to work backwards, and working backwards with a brush means that I adjust the light color detail before I even do any brushing. So if I know what the specific adjustment I want is, maybe I want to increase brightness, reduce contrast, whatever, I can select the brush tool, set the adjustment sliders to wherever I think will be right. You can always change them later. Set the density to high and set the flow very low, maybe 10%. And then set the feather to whatever is appropriate for what you're doing, and place multiple brush strokes over the area you want to adjust, layering the brush strokes until you achieve the result you want. So you can always go back and readjust the sliders. Here's how it might work. Okay, that's the wrong slide. Let's go in here. So let's say I want to lighten up the dark areas of these birds. By the way, these are called southern screamers. I've never heard them scream. Actually, I've never heard them utter a sound. So we're going to create a new mask, and I'm going to do a brush. And what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the exposure up a little bit. I'm going to set the shadows up a lot, and maybe set the whites up a little bit. Then I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to set it to a very low flow. Okay, maybe 10, 12%. It's at 12% now. And I am going to paint on here. And I'm going to do multiple brush strokes until I achieve what I want. Now, it didn't look like I did anything probably, but if I hit the backslash key, that's going to show you the whole thing. So here, I'll do it this way. You can see I'm actually painting. We'll do it here. I'll show you the effect with before and after. And I'm doing this more, so I'm painting on it a lot, which is putting multiple strokes over those areas because they're very dark. And we'll do these areas. Maybe I'll do his neck a little bit. There we go. So let's look at the effect that this had. I'll shut it off. You can see there's a substantial difference. And basically, I could make it, I still haven't achieved full effect yet. If I paint on this even more, I can make it even brighter. I'm not sure I want to, but I could. Because I have this set real low at a real low flow, and I've already adjusted, and I can adjust these more or less if I want. I mean, obviously you can see that doesn't look so great, but I wouldn't want to adjust it that much. Here, maybe I say, I don't like it so much. I'm going to hold Alt or Option down, and I can, whoops. Nope, don't want to do that. Hold on, undo it. I have my flow. When I hold Alt or Option down, I have to change my flow to whatever I want to do it. Increase the size. And it will darken that a little bit because I think that lightened too much. But we're layering our adjustments. And it really, really is nice. I like working backwards with stuff like this when I'm using the brush in a low flow. So that can become very, very useful. I find it a very useful technique. Okay. So auto mask, we've already talked about that. And the idea is that auto mask attempts to confine your brush to areas of similar color and contrast. In other words, edges. It makes it really, really easy to adjust. Well, actually, I think this is a video. Is this a video? No. I had a video. No. Okay, I'm a little confused. Why do I have this slide here twice? This is a video. So basically what I did is I came in here, I set my exposure. I turned the auto mask on. Here we go. And when I paint along the edge, I just want the edge of the bird. And you see that I didn't even get that little dark gray area because it was a different color. And even if I go over the edge, like I did right there, okay, it's easy to correct. And I'm just kind of doing a rough, just a little bit of an area. And I can basically go down there and I can subtract, or I can hold down the Alt or Option key. It would have worked either. And as long as auto mask is on, it's maintaining to the edge. So auto mask just keeps you on the edge. And if you go over, you can always fix it. But auto mask is really handy. But as you see, it doesn't get everything. There's a little area in there it didn't get because it was a different color. So auto mask sometimes can be bad, sometimes good. Sometimes I use auto mask to mask the edge of something, and then I turn it off and do the interior. Okay, other options. Renaming masks. I showed you how you can do that. It's handy to have your masks named so you know what each one is. If you have a lot of masks, as you see in this image, it took 5 masks for me to correct this image. You can create presets. Now, I don't like presets personally. I'll bet a lot of you use presets. And if you like them and use them, fine. I don't like them. I kind of feel that every image is unique and presets just kind of assume a certain effect. And I don't necessarily like it for all images. So I don't use presets. But you can create adjustment presets for masks. So if you come in here and you want to create a preset, I don't do this, so actually, oh yeah, it's on the mask. So for instance, on the mask, say mask 2, if I wanted to create a preset here, how do I do that? And I don't see the adjustment preset. Oh, right here, adjustment preset. So I can create a new adjustment preset, and if I do that, it asks me for a name, and you name it, and it creates a preset that you can use in another image. Okay. Again, I don't use it, so that's why I'm fumbling through this. And basically, here's the process of creating the preset. Should have looked at that before I did it. Resetting sliders automatically. This is really, really useful and important. So when you create a mask, so let's say in this mask, this radial gradient that I created, let's see, where is it? Right here. Well, you can see the adjustments I made. I set the exposure down. Let's do the exposure really low so you can see a big change. And you notice I have reset sliders automatically, but if I uncheck that and I create a new mask, let's say a brush, you see where my exposure is? It did not reset any of the sliders. So that mask, oops, I have a little flow, that mask is got that really low exposure. Okay, so let's undo that. So if I come in here and I have this mask and I click reset sliders automatically and I create a new mask, so I create a new brush, you notice exposure is back in the center. All the sliders are back to their default values. So I'm starting from scratch. Most of the time you're going to want to do this. There are times when you don't want to do this. For instance, I was editing a bunch of images and they were all pretty much the same. They were taken in the same environment, same lighting, and I wanted to have, I was editing each image individually, but I wanted to use the same settings. So I left that unchecked. But most of the time you want to check it and you want to reset the sliders because you want to start fresh. So when checked, each of the settings will revert to the default values when you create new masks. Some masking options may not be available with older raw files. If you go into calibration, I'll show you where that is. It's in the basic tab at the very bottom, calibration. It's in Photoshop and in Lightroom. At the very top, you have something called process. And process version 5 is the current version. 5 has been the current version for a long time now. So your images would have to be real old. And every so often I edit an image and I get it version 4 or version 3. But if you use any other version, you may not get all the masking options. So you want to make sure if you're not getting all your masking options, you want to make sure in calibration that the process version is the current version, which is 5. Here are some keyboard shortcuts that you might find useful. Y is for hiding and showing the mask overlay. So for instance, if we go into here and we look at this mask, let's go to this one. There's the overlay. I press Y. We get to see the actual mask. V will actually hide the actual mask tool. Alt or Option V hides the pins. You can go through this. You can figure out. You can go right to any of the masks by pressing K, G, J, Shift L, Shift C, or Shift D. It will take you to any of the masks. These are handy keystrokes. Okay, so let's look at some examples. These show images that were edited in, they were edited doing basic edits. In other words, auto, maybe increase highlights, but very, very basic edits, nothing very much, and then masked. So here's an image on the left, image on the right. The one on the right is masked, and you can see there's one mask, a radial gradient, which worked out really well. I really like the way it made the vignette, which doesn't look like a vignette, but it kind of brought out the leaf a little bit more. We get a little more complicated. So here's this image, and this is 3 different masks, one for the background, one for the darks, one for the eye. And you can see the difference in the 2 images. In the darks was a luminance range, which is just for the darkest areas. The background was a select subject and a subtract, or an invert rather. In this case, there were 3 masks, the lamb, the background, and the lamb darks. So even though I did the whole lamb, I wanted to do another mask for just the darkest areas of the lamb. And you can see the difference in the images. I darkened the background ever so slightly. And there really wasn't a whole lot of edits done here. This one took 5 masks. Again, what I'm doing is I'm hitting auto, creating a real simple, letting Adobe do the auto adjustment. Then I'm tweaking it. Maybe it made it too bright or too dark. I just tweak it minor, just very, very little. And then I go into the local adjustments. In this case, you can see all the different local adjustments.
Bert, excuse me, did you say that you always use auto?
I always start with auto.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I start there. Sometimes I don't like what it does, but so I tweak it. But I always start because for the most part, auto will get your levels correct generally, and generally that's the biggest problem in a lot of images. And it's painless. You just click one button, and you don't have to go into levels to do it. Now we get a little more complicated. This image has, I think it's 10 individual adjustments, 10 masks. Look at the bottom one, the red tree. And you can see the red tree right there. And you can see how much darker it is. That one was just for the tree. This one is shadows on sheep. You can see there's shadows here. It's weird the way it does that little, looks like a call out. And then orange tint on grass. You notice there's an orange tint here. I don't know what caused the orange tint, but I got rid of it. Red tree shadows. You can see all the different adjustments that I made. And, very often it takes, it depends how complicated the image is. In this image, there were 10 adjustments. One of the adjustments was a straightening, which this guy's a little crooked. The buildings are a little crooked, so I straightened them. But other than that, it was just auto and a bunch. And there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 different adjustments. And basically, no image needs just global adjustments. Every image needs some local adjustments. So things to be aware of. There's some gotchas. The first is, we talked about this, only masks can be inverted. Top level masks can't be inverted. So you can invert the brush or you can do the subject, but you cannot invert the whole thing, which I'm sure they're going to fix at some point. Synchronizing edits in Lightroom or ACR may not properly synchronize with the AI mask. So when you do a select subject or select sky in one and you try and synchronize it, so in other words, you select 2 images and you have in Lightroom at the bottom or in ACR at the bottom, you have your film strip. You select 2 images and say, I want to synchronize the edits. It's not going to do the AI ones because what you end up with is these exclamation points saying it can't do it because it doesn't go ahead and do a select subject. Even though they're similar images, it's not going to do it. So you're going to have to delete that mask and redo it. So Ansel Adams, I love this quote from Ansel Adams, says, dodging and burning are steps to take care of mistakes God made in establishing tonal relationships. So what we're doing is we're dodging and burning. We're doing local adjustments with masking. And basically, all the adjustments I do now in images are with masks, everything. Again, I do an auto, I tweak it ever so slightly, and then I go right into local adjustments. And sometimes I have 10, sometimes more masks. So this is for questions and demonstrations. I want to do one other image I want to show you because this image is something that you might see something like. I doubt if you'll ever see anything this bad, but maybe you will. There it is. Now, this image has many different colors of light. There's blue tarps, there's red tarps, there's shadow, we have all kinds. So what we're going to come in here is we're going to hit auto. And it helped a little bit. And I may just tweak it a little bit by increasing the brightness just a little bit. Okay. So now we have really bad color balance. Now I can come in here and I could tweak the color balance. And when I do this, the guy over here on the left looks pretty good color-wise, but Marianne, my wife, and that's me, we don't. However, if I'm having a really hard time. So here's what I did. And I'm just going to show you the end result of this, because it's just going to take too long to figure out to do this. Where is the image? Don't see it. Ah, there it is. Okay, so this is the edited image. And we can see the color balance is a lot better. Now let's look at what I did. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 masks. So this is the first mask. And I adjusted the color balance on the left side of the image because the ambient light was a different color there. The next image was in this part, the tablecloth, the people on the right. And I did it even a little more on Marianne. And I did a little more on the tablecloth. And if we go over and look at the tablecloth, we see that aside from the exposure being different and the shadows being brought up, the color temperature is brought way down, much cooler. And if we look at this right here, we see that the color temperature is cooler, but not as cool. And if we look at the faces, we see the color temperature is still brought down even more. The color temperature slider wasn't enough in one pass to get the color temperature right. So it took multiple masks and multiple passes to get the color temperatures right. And again, what we end up with is, this is what we started with for color temperatures, and this is what we end up with. But very often you have multiple color temperatures in an image, and it takes multiple masks to make the correction. And again, this is probably the worst case example I can imagine. I'll show you one other image, and I'll show you, this is the after the masks were created. Oh, this is a PSD. I don't want a PSD. I want the raw file. Okay. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different masks. Now let's shut off all the masks. Okay, so this is the original image after basic adjustments, and this is after the masks. So let's look at each one of these. I'm going to shut off each one individually. Okay, no mask. So so this first one is the subject. I did a select subject, and I just kind of brightened it up a little bit, a little texture maybe. So we went from that to that. This next one was the top right of the head. And we see the top right of the head's a little too bright. And we did a mask here. And what is this mask? This is a intersection between a gradient and a select subject. A gradient, and I subtracted the select subject. Because the gradient, I wanted the gradient, let's look at the gradient. So there's a radial gradient. And I subtracted, or I added, no, I subtracted the select subject. Why would I have done that? No, I added, yeah. I'm sorry, I intersected. I can't see the little icon there. So I did a radial gradient and I intersected it with select subject so I wouldn't do the background. I didn't want the background affected. So we have the radial, we have the select subject, and I did an intersection. So I only got the combination of the two, which was that area. And basically the only intent was to darken the top of his head. Again, this is the way it was. This is the way after the mask. This next one, you can see the shoulder area on his back. It was a little too bright. So what I did was I did a radial gradient, intersected with the subject, which gave me just that area. And again, the difference is from that to that. This next one was the front of his face and his beak. So what we end up doing is a radial gradient. And again, intersection with select subject, because I don't want the background affected. And it gave me just that. And we went from that to that. This next one was for his eye. And you can see his eye in lighter, darker. Very subtle adjustment. The next adjustment, the shoulder area, but a little bit more centered. You can see it just under his chin. I gave it a little, made it a little darker. And again, this was done with just a brush. No, I'm sorry, it was done with a radial gradient. Just a small radial gradient right there. And it just darkened it, gave it a little more blacks. And the last was a vignette, which just is a radial gradient. And that was the radial gradient for the vignette. So we went from that to that. It's a matter of looking at this image and saying, what needs to change? What needs to be fixed? Whenever you do image editing, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what needs to change? What do I need to fix? And then go after each of those areas. And that's basically what each of these local adjustments did. There's no way you'd get this image with global adjustments. So back to questions. What do you have? And by the way, the video will be available to you by tomorrow morning, East Coast time. So within, I hope to get it to you tonight, but it may not be available to tomorrow morning. YouTube takes a long time to process these things.
Bert?
Yep.
What about saving? How do we save these as Photoshop files, or so that the edits are attached to it, or how does that work?
Well, when you, okay, so here's Lightroom. And in Lightroom, basically, you're just going to do file save. And when you do or you don't have to save. It's done. Every edit as you do them, including the masking, automatically goes into the XMP and the ACR files. So
How about in Photoshop?
In Photoshop, it's basically you have two choices. At this point, I could choose open, which would open it up in Photoshop, and the XMP data and ACR data would be saved. So all of the adjustments are saved. I'll do that right now. Hit save. It's going to open it up in Photoshop. And if I close it and open recent and reopen that file, the XMP file was saved. So basically it reloaded the raw file and reapplied all of the changes that I had
So
done.
you don't have to save it as a Photoshop file or something else?
You have to, you either have to do an open or you can do done. And if you do done, it doesn't open it in Photoshop, but it saves all the changes you made to the XMP and ACR files.
Hmm.
And you know, you have another choice here. This guy here, I just came up, hold on, came up in the wrong window and something's covering it. I can't get to it. There we go. If you choose this guy right here, which is a download icon, basically you can just save it in whatever format you want, DNG, JPEG, TIFF, whatever. And you can save it, and it basically saves the XMP and ACR data. Because that's all that's being saved when you edit in Lightroom or ACR, is just the changes you made. The original file is unaffected, but all the changes get saved to the XMP and ACR files.
Okay.
Any other questions? We ran a little late.
I have one that I'm still trying to figure out. In Lightroom in the past, if I wanted to add a glow, like say behind a silhouetted mountain or something, I would add a radial gradient and then use a luminance range to tuck that behind the dark mountain. I'm still struggling with how to figure out to do that with the chain.
Intersection.
Okay, so then would I intersect it with the darks or intersect it with the
Yeah.
brights?
So what kind of an image? Like if you had
Say like a silhouetted mountain with you know, a sunset, and I want to put a little bit more of a glow behind the mountain with a radial gradient.
oh, so sort of like this, if you want to glow behind the bird.
Yes.
Okay. In this case, we can do a radial gradient. The easiest way I can think of doing it is something like this. And I can basically just brighten this up, and I can, in this case, I can subtract a select subject. It's thinking. There we go.
Yeah, that's exactly what I have done in the past on some scenic images and had struggled to figure out how to do. Thank
You could intersect, if there was a big brightness difference, you could intersect it with a luminance range as well. You know, in the old days, that's what you did. You know, when you had that luminance range and color range at the bottom of the radial gradient and linear gradient, you were basically doing an intersection.
Okay, just different terminology. Thank you for
Yep.
clarifying.
Yeah, so there we created the glow behind them. Any other questions? Either I was very good or maybe you guys didn't understand it and I was very bad. I'm not sure.
No, it was very good. It just, I think it's going to take practice, particularly for intersect. You know?
Yeah, it will. And, you know, intersect, when I first started, it was like, oh my God, how am I going to understand this? And I started working with it. Then all of a sudden it just clicked. It's like, oh, that's all it is. It's just a matter of you have two masks and you get the, it's a logical OR if you're into programming. or logical and, I'm sorry, logical and. It's what's selected in one and what's selected in the other. That's, that's basically how the intersection works. But yeah, it is confusing at first. And it does take time. And the more you use the masking, and I encourage you to use it a lot, because you're going to find that you can do so much with it. As you see in this image of the, I think it's a teal, blue teal. In this image, I mean, it's spectacular. What we went from, I'm not sure I like the bright mask, but going from that to that, it's just a matter of addressing little areas of your image.
Well, this has been tremendously helpful, Bert. Thank you very much. This is a great program.
Oh, I'm glad you like it.
Well done, Bert. Thank you.
I agree. Very well done.
Yeah, great class.
Thank you, Bert.
Really helpful.
Excellent explanation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, and you guys, I only do one class a month roughly, so and I'm probably not doing any next month. But the next one will probably be focus stacking or infrared. I'm not sure which one yet. But
All right,
thank you
look
for
forward to it.
attending.
Very good.
Thank
Well,
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Again.
Bye.
That's excellent.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.